Hi there, my name is Steve Gearhart, and this is the Unagi Observer. Thank you so much for coming by and watching today's show. I hope you come back again, and if you're returning, or maybe even a subscriber, thank you so much. I want to talk about how anime even got a toehold, or some of the popular media even got a toehold here in America, and how Americans became enamored of anime eventually. So one of the things I wanted to point out is that anime is part of animation history overall. It's the Japan portion of that history. To understand how the anime came over to America, you need to know a little bit of animation history. So we're going to go drop back into the 30s and the 40s real quick, and we're going to talk about how animation was really for movies. Television, it was invented in the 30s. It wasn't really used in the 40s until like 48, 49, when you started getting the first broadcast stations out there. And it wasn't until like the early 50s that television really got into its swing and became a thing. And that's something that people could make money off of. Up to that point, it was movies. That was the most popular media. That was the thing you went to on a Saturday. That was the family outing, the whole 9 yards. So when you went in America, when you went to see a movie, you would go in and you would probably see a newsreel, and then you would see a couple cartoons made by the studio that had made the movie that you came to see. Then after those cartoons, you'll probably see a couple trailers, and then you see the movie itself. That was how cartoons were used. It was branding. So like when we're talking about Warner Brothers, you're talking about like things like Bugs Bunny, you're talking about Walt Disney, you're talking about Woody Woodpecker. All those kinds of guys, all those kinds of cartoons were really about branding the studio. So each studio had an animation wing to it, and depending upon the quality of their product, depended on the quality of the animation budget. Meaning that if you were making a really, really spectacular, epic movie, you're probably going to want to give your animation budget some decent money. So that's why when you look at some of the older Bugs Bunny, Woody Woodpecker cartoons and things like that, you look at it and you go, wow, that was the animation in the 30s and 40s? Yes, if you had the budget. So what happened? Television starts to take over. Television is getting into everybody's life. It's in just about every American home by the early 50s. In Japan, they're kind of catching up to us a little bit, but it's not really the same thing. And understand in Japan that when they watch movies, remember this is post-war Japan, so they were seeing stuff that we wanted them to see. So they were seeing the Warner Brothers cartoons and things like that. So they were basically seeing the same things we were, and for the same reasons. And so when television came about, the movies started to change. They dropped the cartoons slowly from the routine of the movie watching. It took until about the mid-60s for them to completely drop the cartoons out of movies. Same thing with the newsreels, just because of the technology. So at a certain point, probably about towards the late 50s, early 60s, the American studios figured out, oh, hey, wait, we can still use these cartoons. All we have to do is license them out or sell royalty rights or things of that nature, and we just let the local TV stations do whatever they want with them, and they pay us royalties on it, or they pay a licensing fee on it, so we can still make money. That's why for so many years we saw old Bugs Bunny cartoons, Tom and Jerry, Woody Woodpecker again. That's why up until like almost the mid 80s, we kept seeing these same cartoons in syndication over and over and over and over again, because it was a cheap way for the studios to make money. And as you noticed, they stopped making them after a while. And then when they did make them, it was very targeted and for a niche audience. So now that you get the idea of the transition of animation from movies to television, let's talk about the technology of broadcast television for a moment.
The television has come a long way since its invention in the early 30s. The sets were pretty simple, the transmission power pretty weak, very few actual stations were transmitting, and very few people were rich enough to even afford a television. Before the advent of cable, renting videos, or streaming services, and the internet, television relied on a certain set of technologies. One of them had to do with the antenna that would receive and transmit the over-the-air transmission for the broadcast, as well as vacuum tubes to provide you the actual screen on your television and the electronics that enabled you to change the frequencies or the sound. So the first TVs were really pretty simple in their look. It was simply a box that housed the screen, the electronics, the vacuum tubes, and you had to understand that the first televisions did not have remotes as we know them now, and you actually had to get up off your butt, walk over, and use the dials to change to the channel that you wanted to watch. And that meant that you had to have a good antenna on your TV or one on your roof. On top of your television were the antenna that were often called rabbit ears. Either your television came with those antenna or you had to buy them separately. They were called rabbit ears because they kind of look like rabbit ears. Now, as long as the transmissions that the rabbit ears were receiving was strong, then they worked just fine. But if you lived in an area that had weak reception overall, you needed to mount a more powerful antenna, receiving antenna, on the roof of your home or on your building. For many decades, television was based on transmission power. If you had a license to use a powerful broadcast antenna, you could reach an audience of over a span of a couple hundred square miles. Otherwise, your station can get a license for a smaller broadcast area, smaller power, and that usually went somewhere between 25 or 100 or so square miles, and that was pretty much it for your broadcast area. Alright, there were two major frequency groupings that could be broadcasted. I am going to oversimplify this here because otherwise I'd be talking about this for the next hour and a half. Just know that one grouping was called UHF, or ultra high frequency, and the other grouping was called VHF, or very high frequency. Now here's why that matters. So let's look back at the front of the television set back in the day. Then let's take a look at those two knobs there, those two dials that you find your channel on. Now the top knob is the grouping for the VHF channels. The knob would usually start with the letter U, then go from channels 2 through 13. These channels were normally your major network channels for NBC, ABC, or CBS, as well as local affiliate channels of those networks. Now, if you wanted to watch the smaller broadcasting channels, which were usually local channels, you first had to turn the top knob to U, then use the UHF channels, which numbered 14 to 69, to find the station that you wanted to watch. So if you were looking for anime in the 70s and early 80s, you would normally have to search among the UHF stations, the one with the numbers 14 to 69. It was very rare that one of the VHF station or the national broadcasting stations would actually show an anime show. Okay, so that is TV technology up to the early 80s in an very oversimplified nutshell.
So basically that's how the technology of it worked. Now here's the business side of it. To make your local programming work, you have to create advertising dollars. That means that your show has to attract advertisers who want their product to be associated with that show because they think that the people who are watching that show are going to watch the ad and then buy their product or go to their store or go to their theme park or watch their movie, whatever it is. So that's why programming started to become really important in basically the 60s. In the 50s, they pretty much threw everything up against the wall. That's why you see so many broadcast shows with like only 1 or 2 seasons, because they really didn't know. They didn't really understand their demographics yet. And that's why some of the shows, like I Love Lucy, went on for such a long time, because they found the demographic and they said, okay, we're doing this forever. So, same concept for the local channels, for the local guys whose broadcast area is like maybe 100 miles or 50, depending upon their broadcasting power, the transmission power. And so what that meant was that as local TV stations are looking for product, are looking for programming to put up there, they're also looking for the advertisers to pay for that programming. So that's why a lot of local stations did a lot of syndication. It was just cheaper to do that. So that's why a lot of local TV stations didn't do their own programming. What they did a lot of was like what Channel 20 in the DC area did, was that they had local celebrities hosting a particular type of show. Like there was this one guy who was Captain 20 who did a lot of kids shows on television, and his twin brother was Count Vlad, and in the evening he would do sci-fi and horror movies, host a sci-fi and horror movie show. And so that's kind of how they would get around it. So how did anime break into this? Well, again, it has to go back to animation history. What they found was that, okay, you had a demographic early in the morning from about 6 a.m. to about 8 a.m., 9 a.m., depending, where your toddler, preschooler, or elementary school kid would be up. You as the mother would be up with your kid, helping your kid, making breakfast. Your husband would be getting up. He's going to be eating breakfast, drinking coffee, whatever. And you're going to plop your kid, or you're going to bring the television into the kitchen, and you're going to turn it on so there's some type of noise going on in the background where people will be distracted from you so you could do whatever it is that you're doing at that time. So what they discovered was that kids watch television. So if the kids are watching the television, then they can throw advertising of theme parks, a kids movie, kids toys, things like that. So that make the kid turn around and go to mom, "Mommy, I want that toy. I want that toy." You get the idea. So they found that there was a niche demographic in those time slots. Then they discovered that there's the older kids come home after 2:30, 3 o'clock, and they just want to sit down and veg out in front of the television for an hour or two. So there's a niche area right there, and there's a demographic right there that they can cater to. Again, kids are annoying. Mommy, give me this. Daddy, give me that. I saw it on TV. Gimme, 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 gimme. You get the idea. So they are able to make money off of these programming. So they put the animation in those areas. So what started happening was that out west, on the west coast, you had small production companies whose sole purpose was to buy very cheap programming, buying them and then licensing them out to larger stations, to actual broadcast stations, usually local stations. And because they were on the West Coast, they got more Asian stuff coming in. So that's how you got like Kung Fu Masterpiece Theater, which is something that was shown in DC, or shows like it. That's where you start getting like the Sunday morning, Saturday afternoon kaiju movies, Godzilla and things like that. Those were directly from small production companies buying already made movies and simply spending a budget of dubbing them over and retitling them for American audiences. So what these small companies did is they said, well, let's take a look at the Japanese animation. And the reason why they were looking at anime at that time was because of what Japan was doing. Now, like I said before, the movies were showing cartoons before, the studios were showing cartoons before the movies. And we did that with the movie industry in Japan during post-war Japan before we left. Americans left and let Japan be Japan again. And as a result, the Japanese animation market didn't really make anything for movies. But when television became a thing in Japan, that's where the animation went. Most importantly is that they were made for television, specifically for television, and they used it in different time slots. These were shows that were not just shown in the morning or in the afternoon. These were shows that were shown to the family. So they would all sit around. It would be like, the old Thursday nights during the 80s and 90s on NBC, when you'd sit there for 4 hours with your family watching all these different good shows. Same idea, same concept. These were actual television shows for people. Yes, they were targeted. Some of them were targeted for kids and families and so on and so forth. But it wasn't. It was the niche for them. The demographics weren't narrow; they were large. So going back to the Western production companies here in America, they see this and they go, "Well, how can we replicate that?" So they bought a bunch of anime that had already been made, so they didn't have to spend an animation budget. So the animation is already made. They buy it, and they bring it over, and they go, okay, we're gonna have to retitle this, and we're gonna redub it, and we don't spend a whole lot of money on it. Again, that's the whole point. So they do the redubbing. That's why, if you ever wondered why with early anime like Speed Racer, you get a lot of the really talking really really fast. Talking really fast, talking really fast. That's why you have that. So they grabbed these anime, a handful of these anime, and they said they repurposed it, redubbed it, retitled it, and they started selling it to syndication in various markets, and it worked. So now you know how anime got a toehold in America. Now you get an idea of how difficult retro anime was at the time. If you were an anime lover, if you were an otaku in the 70's, it was tough. It was tough. You pretty much had to go to Japan to watch what you wanted to watch. It was very hard to get some of this stuff to be imported to America. So anyway, so there's that retro. Next week is going to be a different topic altogether. I'm thinking Marine Boy. And as always, thank you for watching. Thanks for coming in here and watching this show. I hope this wasn't too boring for you. It's kind of dry, but I think it's important. And the goal is to get to 250 subscribers. If we do that, y'all get a digital sushi roll. Who doesn't like sushi? So please subscribe. So if you like this video, definitely like it. If you want to subscribe, and I would love it if you subscribed, please do. And again, my name is Steve Gearhart. This is the Unagi Observer, and thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.